Greetings everyone, this is the Hipster Snek, and today we're going to do a Snek Tech breakdown for a console that, unlike my previous two, I actually owned at one point. This go-around, as if the video's title didn't tip you off already, is the look at 1999's Sega DreamCast. Well, I say 1999, but the 9/9/99 release date was exclusive to its American launch. It was already up and operating in Japan as early as November of 1998, and continued to be released around the world as late as December of 2000 with its launch in Indonesia, which is unfortunate timing as the death date of the console is labeled around mid-2001, but hey, I guess nothing's perfect. Due to its specs and launch window, the Dreamcast is considered the first of the 6th generation, a designation it would eventually come to share with the PlayStation 2, Nintendo GameCube, and the Microsoft Xbox. Fun aside, in the first draft of this script I had actually written it down as Xbox One. Then I realized that that's actually the designation of the much newer Xbox One, so I had to change that. While the earliest days of the Dreamcast's development appear vague and somewhat contradictory by account, the project was originally codenamed White Belt, before becoming known as Dural, named such for a secret female fighter from Sega's Virtua Fighter series, and subsequently dubbed Katana. Seriously, reading the earliest notes available on the Dreamcast dev cycle is cryptic and often nonsensical. But the final name was selected by sometime in early 1998 by the looks of it. What's important to know is that after the bizarre chimera that was the Saturn, Sega opted to do precisely the opposite this go-around, to keep the next console as simple and straightforward as humanly possible. And that white box, weighing in at a smidgen over 3 pounds, arrived at the world as Sega's last hurrah in the hardware market. Let's pause the history here and start the breakdown. Like before, I have this handy-dandy unit here for take-apart purposes. Actually, this isn't my original unit. Due to a move that happened many years ago, I gave mine away to a friend. But worry not, this poor thing was dead before the dissection process, and I wasn't able to find a way to get it ticking again, so, well, here's to you, Dreamcast. So let's start with the controller first. It's a simple, compact, and elegant design. While the 6th generation would wholeheartedly embrace the dual-stick design found in late PS1 controller layouts, the Dreamcast opted to forgo that for a one-stick configuration, with a control pad beneath that on the left-hand side of the face. And if these 4 brightly colored buttons and their particular letter designations look kinda familiar, it might be because this was more than likely used as the base model, or at least inspiration, for what would eventually become the Xbox controller and its many smaller successors. The Dreamcast also opted to continue the Sega tradition of ignoring the existence of a select button, because seriously, how many games actually use that anyway? And it gives a large start button to occupy the center area. The back of the controller is ruled by L and R triggers, which are pressure sensitive, and most games use these for camera controls. As an interesting aside, the controller actually has its cord extend out from the bottom of most controllers, but there's a little clasp on the back you can feed it through in order to point it outward towards the console. Weirdly enough, reading some reviews from that time, this design got a lot of hate back in the day, but I think it feels good, and unlike the N64, I know precisely where my hands are supposed to go on this kind of controller. And lastly, that gigantic hole in the center of the frame I've been tactfully ignoring up until now. This is where you would place your memory card, specialized removable plug-in units called Visual Memory Units, or VMUs, which slot into one of the 2 available slots. Obviously, these aren't going to be doing much of anything for the sake of this video. As I've said, this console is already dead and these things have 20-year-old batteries now, but if they were in working order, the VMUs had a simple black LCD display, which would show different animations during regular gameplay, and could also be played with independent of the Dreamcast for different minigames, and, as were the cases in Sonic Adventure 1 and 2, be used as a way of transporting the artificial life creatures known as Chow between games and saves. This is why, even in the GameCube and PC ports, the game has a save file for main game data and Chow Garden data separately. Now there's a second slot on these controllers as well, which could be outfitted with any number of different add-ons. I'll get to those in a little bit, seeing as how I don't have any to demonstrate for the sake of this video. So let's move on to the console itself now. The Dreamcast is quite compact. It's a handsome devil too, even if my unit here has suffered the yellowing that comes with age. Most American Dreamcasts came in the default white, though there were some black Sega Sports variations, and in Japan the console had a whole rainbow of various colors and themes. These include special versions released for Seaman, Resident Evil Code Veronica, a Hello Kitty version, and even an exclusive one from Toyota at certain retail locations. But regardless of color, it has a strong silhouette and a small profile. Standing almost 3 inches tall and nearly 8 inches long and about the same depth, The Dreamcast's outer shell reflects the innermost design philosophy assigned to the project: simple, straightforward, and efficient. On the top, we have the Dreamcast red swirl logo front and center, and the front end is lined with a power button, a power light which would come on if this unit worked and was plugged in, and the open CD tray button, which feels about as tense as I remember my old unit having been 15 years ago. Obviously, you could open this and set CDs inside. Actually, a quick aside, not only could the Dreamcast play back music CDs, the actual discs used for the Dreamcast were called GD-ROMs, or specialty CDs with a gigabyte capacity. Near as I can tell, no one but Sega really ever used this, as the DVD boom was well underway. But most common CDs at the time capped out at around 700 megabytes storage-wise, so this did allow for devs to pack on more content than a regular CD could handle. And I'm just going to stick a pin in that particular topic and come back to it in a bit, as that's actually important for different reasons we'll get to later. Alright, that said, on the front is the Sega logo, unchanged after all these years, and 4 controller ports, labeled by letter rather than number, and a note about its compatibility with Windows CE. Yes, the Dreamcast had Microsoft devs work on it in order to facilitate PC ports and assist with its operating system, which is funny as many people who had worked on the Dreamcast would go on to work on the Xbox not too long afterward. And while the left-hand side has nothing of note, there is a lot to talk about opposite that. Not only do we have some nice ventilation slots here, we get our first glance at the Dreamcast's inbuilt modular modem. Yes, the Dreamcast was the very first major console to have a modem, and unlike the PS2, it came with the console to start. In fact, the American release was superior in this respect, as the Japanese Dreamcast launched with a 33K modem, and in the States we got a 56K version. And yes, you can just pop it out. I seem to recall reading they were looking at ways to enhance its online capabilities, but I don't think it stayed on the market long enough for that to ever actually come to fruition. That aside, on the south face is, well, everything you'd expect to find. A line for a phone cable, some more vents, and the AC plug as well as AV out and serial ports. Putting this turtle on its back shows everything a simple machine should have, including regular, normal screws that don't require proprietary screwdriver adapters to undo, as it should be. As said, everything about this console was designed to be direct and simple. Taking it apart reveals effectively 2 layers, the CD drive layer, which is just that, it's the CD drive layer. Everything here just runs the disk, and you can see where the controllers plug in on the front. But this isn't really why we're here, so we're going to dig a little bit deeper. There we go, the motherboard. Now, before I do get into the nitty-gritty, it should be noted for our tech experts that everything I'm going to cover here was more or less standard PC components. This helped keep costs for the Dreamcast low and parts in high supply. In many ways, the Dreamcast was kind of a small Windows PC, adding to the simple system architecture and the ease with which it was to develop for. Anyway, this fella just south of that biggest chip on the board, that's going to be the main CPU, a 2-way Hitachi SH4 chip. And if that sounds familiar, it's because that's the successor chip to the one that they use in the Saturn. The sound chip, which to this day I have yet to find, is the Yamaha AICA, which makes sense as the CD tray itself is a Yamaha 12x speed GD drive. Lastly, the Dreamcast carried a respectable 12 MB base RAM, 8 MB video RAM, and 2 MB specifically for sound. Now, why there are chips marked Hyundai? Search me. I couldn't find what those were supposed to be in my attempts online, so maybe someone in the comments smarter than me can enlighten me on what those mean. Oh, speaking of nebulous finds, let's talk about some of those console peripherals as I promised. I don't have any of these, but there were a lot of various bolt-ons, such as a planned add-on by iOmega for a zip drive functionality that would give the console 100 megabyte storage capacity. That would be something, but sadly that never came to market. Next, there was a rumble pack you could slot in as well. Some third-party controllers had this functionality to begin with, as memory serves. Also, there was a fishing rod accessory used for games like Sega Bass Fishing, but here's some fun trivia for you. It also worked on Namco's Soul Calibur, translating horizontal and vertical inputs of the fishing rod into weapon attacks. It's kind of a prototypical Wiimote in a way. There was also a microphone adapter for games like Seaman, which starred a mouthy fish creature who would ask the player about themselves or openly mock them. There were mice and keyboards to allow the console to operate a bit more like a PC, and also double as the console, which also had the best typing tutor ever in the form of Typing of the Dead, a mod of House of the Dead except as a typing tutor where correct and swift spelling resulted in shooting zombies. And there was the Dream Eye, a camera peripheral that, like every camera peripheral that every console has ever tried, was a failure and ultimately resulted in nothing. Seriously, game devs, nobody wants these things. Stop making them. Oh, speaking of not making them anymore, let's pick up on the legacy of the Dreamcast. The Dreamcast was met with a pretty successful launch in 1999, with games like Sonic Adventure and Soul Calibur being very strong launch titles. Its strong influence from the PC sphere allowed it to easily adapt arcade titles like Dead or Alive 2, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, and Crazy Taxi. And many devs, both within Sega and without, put forth a large number of excellent titles, like Space Channel 5, Choo Choo Rocket, Skies of Arcadia, Power Stone, Phantasy Star Online, essentially being the first console MMO, and Shenmue, the game largely credited as the starting point of the Yakuza franchise. Before being discontinued in 2001, the Dreamcast sold over 9 million units worldwide, and games continued being made for it for another year on top of that. Heck, Sega of Japan continued to repair and service them well until 2007. So, how did it stack up? Not amazingly. The PS2 sold 155 million units and survived a decade past it. The GameCube sold over 21 million units worldwide, and the Xbox, in many ways the Dreamcast's true successor, sold more than 24 million units. One major problem was Sega had shown they had a problem with commitment. Between the failures of the Sega CD, the Sega 32X, the Sega Neptune, which never even made it to market, and the Sega Saturn, a lot of fans were hard-pressed to pull the trigger on the purchase. Plus, there were a bunch of other, stronger DVD-powered consoles that would come right after it. And while the 1GB GD-ROMs were impressive, they just couldn't compete with the 4.7GB capacity of a DVD, which even Nintendo's Purple Lunchbox mini discs were based off of. And speaking of those GD-ROMs, they had virtually zero protection from any form of piracy. While CDRs usually weren't as large, it was rarely an issue, and ways were found to copy the games, and the Dreamcast had no ways of determining a legit copy from a fake. And the timing couldn't have been worse. It came out too late to blow away the N64 and PS1, and too early to really size up the incoming trio of rivals, which ultimately left it in their dust. The Dreamcast has a large, robust, and overall incredibly solid library of games. But even that fact, the low price, the easy-to-use designs, all that couldn't save it. It was too little too late, and thus Sega abandoned the hardware market to their rivals and became a third-party software developer. And that's that, really, which is a shame. Of all the consoles I know of off the cuff, the one that truly deserved better than it got probably was the Sega DreamCast. This has been the Hipster Snek, bringing to you today a new Snek Tech. If you liked today's episode, there's that conveniently labeled like button so you can tell me. Did you have a Dreamcast or know someone who did? What were your thoughts on it? Leave a comment down below telling me. And for more content like this each week, tap that subscribe and bell icon so you'll never miss a one. We cover obscure games, indie excellence, Snek Tech, and more all right here, including the Tomodachi Bros Review podcast, now housed here on Channel Snek. And continue to join me each week for all this and more, and I will see you there. Whoops. I can cut that out. Okay, I think that's inordinately long enough. Whoops. And the CD tray. That's it. It's a CD tray in its natural habitat. Or outside its natural habitat, I should say. Whoa, I almost had a VTuber moment there. Come on, focus.